Hey, it's Ross from RossLukman.com. Today I'd like to talk to you about the Victron comms feature of the Epoch Elite version 2.0 batteries. This feature is very misunderstood, but it's very powerful, so I'd like to explain some of the impacts that Victron comms is going to make on your power system performance and your experience as the end user for things like monitoring. And kind of the best way to describe Victron comms is to show what happens when you don't have it. And I have enough students that have installed all sorts of batteries, and so I can kind of talk to what they're going to run into when they get the batteries home, have them installed and link them into a larger system. And at that point, you're kind of stuck with however that battery is going to perform. And so perhaps today I can kind of foreshadow the impact of Victron comms, and you can decide if it's relevant to you and whether you care to have it. So as I mentioned, it's going to make an impact on your monitoring. So what I mean is a lot of these batteries nowadays, they're going to have a Bluetooth app, and this one is no exception. It's going to link up to the app, and with the Epoch Elite batteries, you can have up to 16 batteries in parallel. They're going to come into the app, and at the top, it's going to have your aggregate state of charge from all of your batteries that are linked together. You have a few more with Epoch Elite. With some of the cheaper batteries, you're going to have up to 4 in parallel instead of 16. So you can do larger systems with the Victron comms. It's going to be able to coordinate more batteries. But the big one really for monitoring is a lot of people, they get their app, they really like that, and then they put a nice Victron system like this with the Servo GX or Econo GX, and they want their battery monitor data on the screen here. You can see the light blue square. That is the battery bank coming in, and that's the aggregate state of charge between these two batteries. And what ends up happening with my students that have batteries that don't have Victron comms is they have a nice app, they want it to be here, and I have to tell them that they need a separate battery monitor. So that could be like a smart shunt or a link shunt, and essentially, the man who has 2 watches never knows the time. So if you have battery monitors here and a battery monitor out in the system, they're never quite going to match. Maybe when you charge the batteries to 100%, everything will be on the same page. But most of the time, they're going to be slightly off, and it's a little bit irritating. But with Victron comms, the batteries are going to aggregate their state of charge amongst them, and it's going to be sent here, and this is the aggregate state of charge between all the batteries in the battery bank. So it could be up to 16 batteries with this particular model, and your monitoring is going to be coordinated, and that's really the word for Victron comms, is a coordination between the batteries and the chargers, and between the monitoring that you see here and the monitoring that you see here. And even going, if you use the Victron VRM Portal, the Victron Remote Monitoring Portal, your Epoch battery data is going to show up on that portal as well. And so there's just an extreme amount of coordination with the monitoring. Now, when it comes to charging, there's also coordination. And essentially what's going to happen is the batteries are going to tell the Servo what charge that they want, and the Servo is going to pass that information on to the chargers. And it's going to utilize DVCC from Victron, distributed voltage and current control. So there's a setting in here where we are going to link the batteries in, and then that setting is going to help us control all the chargers. So how that's going to play out in the long term is we want to prevent charging the batteries up to their absorption voltage, which is kind of a high point voltage when we charge them up to 100%. With lithium batteries, you don't want to do that all the time, and you want to kind of limit how much that happens. And with Victron comms, it makes it very easy to charge them up when they need it, and then the batteries are going to say, hey, I'm done, go ahead and drop my charge voltage. And what that's going to do is force the chargers down to that charge voltage, and basically it's just going to float the batteries until the batteries decide when they need another absorption charge, and it's going to allow the charge voltage from our chargers to go back up to that higher absorption voltage. Another big one, which is kind of obscure, is the absorption time. You don't want to leave these batteries in a high absorption voltage for a long time. You really want to limit that. It's kind of a job where you want to get in, do the job, and then stop. And with the Victron comms for the new 2.0 batteries, they are going to limit the absorption time to 15 minutes per battery. And in my testing, I saw that this was exact. So with 2 batteries linked together here, we had 30 minutes of absorption time, and then it cut off. So, or instead of cut off, it dropped the voltage to a float voltage essentially. And what's nice about that is these chargers may come on at different times. So you may have shore power plugged in, and then the sun comes up in the morning and solar power comes online, and the chargers are usually going to act independently. We're going to give them the charge parameters, but instead of this one running through an absorption cycle and then this one comes online and takes the batteries through another absorption cycle, it's going to listen to the batteries, and the batteries are going to say, hey, I had an absorption cycle yesterday or 3 days ago, go ahead and float me at this lower voltage. And essentially that's going to give you longevity for the batteries. They're not going to be constantly cycled and worn out. Essentially their lifespan can be shortened if you're constantly absorption charging them. And so by putting the batteries in control, they're able to dictate the charge voltages and the time frames that they want for their optimum performance. And then lastly, on discharging, they are going to be linked together with a little Ethernet cord here that comes with each battery, and you're able to link them all together so they can communicate. And what I saw the other day with one of my students, he had batteries without Victron comms, and he put them under load, and one battery shut off, the internal MOSFETs cut off, and the other battery kept going and carried the entire load. And he was in talks with that particular battery manufacturer as to what was going on, but frankly, nobody knew. We had to rely on the manufacturer to tell us what was going on. So you do have some squirrely things that happen with the BMSs, the battery management systems in various batteries. And a lot of people, they just buy based on price and the capacity. They say, hey, this is a giant battery. It's going to give me all the capacity I need. And they don't really worry about the electronics and the controls. And as I said, once you get that home, you're kind of stuck with however that battery is going to perform. And so with the Victron comms linking the batteries are going to behave like a team. And what's really cool too is the charge and discharge parameters are going to be passed to the servo. And I'll show you that later in the video, but you're going to see the charge parameters and discharge parameters change. And that is a dynamic parameters that are sent to the servo based on how the batteries are doing, whether they're run down or charged up. Those parameters are going to dynamically change to control the chargers and the overall system. So it's just a massive amount of coordination, which may not be apparent. You know, what does Victron comms even mean? What does it do? But it's going to coordinate your monitoring. It's going to coordinate your charging. It's going to coordinate the discharging and make sure the batteries operate as a team when they're receiving power and putting out power. So just a massive amount of coordination, and it's going to give you a more seamless operation of your system. So next up, let's go ahead and look at setting up Victron comms. I'm going to give you a few pointers here at the batteries, and then we're going to take it into the servo, and I'm going to show you how to do the programming to set this up. It's pretty easy. As you can tell, we have one cord that's going to come into the servo, and we're going to populate the settings that are going to make it talk to the batteries. Very easy to set up. But before we get into that, if you're interested in your overall power system, not just your batteries, but your things like your chargers, your solar, your shore power, your alternator charger, then I have a document that you may be interested in called the Ultimate Van Power Cheat Sheet. It actually has a discussion on different battery types with internal BMSs and external BMSs and the strengths and weaknesses of those. That's going to help you narrow in on which battery type is going to be right for you. It also has a section on various charging sources and how they all come into play at different times to give you a well-rounded charging strategy so you never run out of power out on the road. And then lastly, it has a really cool conceptual diagram that's going to show essentially your whole system, kind of like you see here. It's going to show it all on one page. It's going to show you how that power makes its way through the system from, say, your solar panel, how that power is going to come through and come out and charge something like a laptop. So it's a really cool diagram that I think you'll find useful. To get your own copy of the Ultimate Van Power Cheat Sheet, all you have to do is click the link below or go to rosslukeman.com/vanpower. All right, with that, let's go ahead and zoom in on the batteries. I'm going to show you a few things for setting up Victron comms. All right, so here we are at the Victron comms connections. And I want to point out that in every system, you're going to have a master battery and up to 15 slave batteries. And the master battery is the one that's going to have the main wiring harness, and it's going to report over to your Victron Servo or Ekrano GX. And we'll look at that exact connection in just a minute. But basically, it's going to leave the master battery from the blue port, and you're going to have this harness. The giveaway is you're going to have a waterproof connector on one of the connections. That's going to go into the battery itself. And then that harness is going to split off in a couple directions. One of them is going to say Victron. That's going to go to the Servo or Ekrano GX. We'll look at that in just a second. The other wire is going to say meter, and it's pretty self-explanatory. It's going to go to the meter, which is going to have your battery data from all of your batteries aggregated together. So it's going to have your state of charge, the voltage of the batteries averaged out, as well as the amperage going in or out of the battery bank. The meter is also going to put out a Bluetooth signal, and that's going to connect to the Epoch app on your phone or tablet. You definitely want to set that up. But as far as the other connections, you can see we have this little jumper here between the slave battery, and it's reporting that data into the master battery. As you can imagine, if we had up to 15 slave batteries, you would leave this blue port and come into the black port on the master. So with each additional battery, you're going to have another jumper. And you're going to leave the blue port, come into the black. Leave the blue, come into the black. And that allows all those slave batteries to report their data down the CAN bus to the master battery, so the master battery can communicate that information with the larger Victron system. So that is how you get the Victron comms set up properly. At this point, let's jump to the other end of the batteries, and we're going to talk about how to get your dip switches set up for seamless operation so the batteries work right away. I wanted to briefly mention these. There's not a whole lot to discuss other than you want to go in the manual and get your exact setup. So I have two 460 amp hour batteries for a 920 amp hour configuration. You have dip switch settings for the master battery as well as the slave battery. And you just want to double check these and make sure that you get them right so everything works right out of the gate. All right, so here we are at the Servo, and I've cleared out a lot of the cables so you can see exactly where we're plugging in. But I want to point out VE CAN and BMS CAN here at the top. These refer to these black ports at the back. And we need to plug into either one of these. These are CAN buses. The BMS CAN is something from the older Servos where it is automatically set up for the BMS protocol, which is 500 kilobits per second. But in the newer Servos in the Ekrano, you're going to see VE CAN 1 and VE CAN 2. And basically we need to plug into either one. And the main thing is we're going to program it in the Servo. So it doesn't matter where we plug in. Let's go ahead and go into VE CAN. And you can see the little Victron label there on our cable. And for good measure, we're going to add a terminator. That is used for these CAN bus connections on the Servo GX. That's going to come with the Servo. That's going to increase the reliability of the signal. But at this point, we're pretty much done. The Victron comms are connected, and now we need to go into the Servo Programming, and I'll show you how to set up the protocol for this VE CAN port to bring in the Victron comms data. All right, so here we are in the Servo. I have switched it over to the light display mode so it's a little easier to see. And I've also cleared out the CAN bus protocol so the Victron comms is no longer coming in. I wanted you to be able to see it from the beginning and see how we bring it in. So what we're going to do is click on the screen and we're going to go to settings. And I will point out that the firmware is new. They've done a nice job with the new layout. This is firmware 3.62, and the VE CAN port is now going to fall under connectivity, which makes sense. So we're going to click on that. You can see our CAN bus ports there at the bottom. We plugged into the VE CAN port, so we're going to click on that, and we need to change the CAN bus profile to 500 kilobits per second. And you can see it says BMS LV. So that makes sense because we're trying to connect to the BMSs of the Epoch batteries. So we're going to click on that, and it's going to select it. And we also have network status, so we can see the information being sent and received over that connection. But at this point, if we go back out and click on Overview, you now see the battery data coming in. So not too hard. And we have the battery temperature, volts, amps, and watts going in and out of the entire battery bank. So this is the aggregate data of up to 16 batteries, as mentioned before. So that's the monitoring part, but we need to set up one more setting called DVCC, and that's going to help us with the charging. So we're going to click on Settings. DVCC is a little further down under System Setup. You can see it there. We'll go in there, and they've now listed it under Charge Control. It's a little bit easier to say than DVCC. But Charge Control, it's turned on, and I want to zoom down to the bottom here. You can see the Epoch battery has been selected as our controlling BMS. And so the Epoch batteries are going to dictate the voltage and current controls out to the chargers, and the Victron Servo is going to rely on the Epoch's BMS to give those instructions. And if we click on it, you don't want to use automatic selection in case it deselects it. We want to go ahead and click on it and select the Epoch. That's the model number. But shout out to MV Intrigue, Al Smith, for instructions on that. We're going to go back into DVCC, and we want to select these at the bottom: shared voltage sense, shared temperature sense, and shared current sense. So with the temperature sensor, you can see that the temperature is being pulled out of the batteries, and that's going to be given to the charger so they can optimize what they're doing. And then on the shared voltage sense, it's also going to pull the voltage out of the batteries and share it with the chargers. Because when the chargers are putting out a high current and they're several feet away from the battery bank, they can't really get an accurate assessment of what the battery voltage is, because the voltage drops between the charger and the battery bank. It's going to drop every foot of cable that you go down. If you have a high current, basically the voltage reading at the charger is going to be distorted. So by having the voltage of the battery bank sent to the chargers digitally, they're going to have a much more accurate voltage reading, and they're going to be able to adjust accordingly. Now at the top, I'm actually going to leave these settings off: limit charge current and limit managed battery voltage, charge voltage. You can artificially lower these below what the batteries are going to request if you'd like to take the current and voltage artificially low, but at this time I'm going to leave those off. I really want the battery to send its charge and voltage parameters, and we don't want to artificially lower that. But you definitely want to turn on DVCC and turn on all of these shared parameters here, and make sure you manually select the Epoch as the controlling BMS, and we should be good to go. So I'm going to go back out to Overview, and now to get to any battery monitors that are enabled, we can just click on the battery icon, and you can see it's going to bring in the Epoch, and then we also have a battery monitor inside the Multiplus. But for now, I'm going to click on the Epoch battery, and you can get all of that battery data. If we click on Details, you can see that we have 2 modules online, 2 batteries, 920 amp hours of installed capacity. We have 907 amp hours available, so we are at 98%. If I go back out here, you can see state of charge, 98%. State of health is nice to have. It's going to keep track of the cycles and tell you the health of the battery. We have battery temperature. Again, that's being sent to the chargers with DVCC. But if we go down here to parameters, these charge parameters are really going to unlock the magic of Victron comms, because they're going to be sent from the batteries into DVCC to tell the chargers what to do and what charge voltages and currents to send into the battery bank. And these numbers are dynamic. So right now we have our charge voltage limit set at 14.2 volts. That is an absorption voltage for these particular batteries. Once they're done with their absorption cycle, that is going to drop to 13.5 volts, and the batteries are just going to float at that lower voltage, and basically they are going to be able to tell the chargers, do not go any higher than 13.5 volts until this number changes back to 14.2 and the batteries are ready for another absorption cycle. Next up, we have our charge current limit. This is based on 230 amps per battery for the 12 volt Epoch Elite model. And this number is not going to change very often. Occasionally, if you are charging the batteries and one of the cells gets too high on its voltage, it will remove itself from charging, and you'll see this number drop by 230 amps to indicate that that battery has dropped out and it no longer wants a charge. And basically the charge current limit is going to be passed to DVCC, and it's going to tell the chargers, hey, we can no longer send 460 amps to the battery bank. We need to drop that down to 230 amps, and it will throttle the chargers if needed to that new lower limit. So that is definitely very handy and great for the batteries. Next up, we have our discharge current limit. Again, this number is not going to drop very often. It's 330 amps per battery for the 12 volt model. And if you run the battery bank down close to zero and there's hardly any power left in the batteries, this number may drop. And again, that's the batteries telling the overall system what they're able to put out based on where they are in the charge cycle. Lastly, we have request charging. This feature is new for the Venus OS firmware 3.62 from Victron. And at this time, this does not change. So we are going to focus on these top three numbers. But these are the parameters that are going to be dynamic, and they're going to be fed into the Victron system to make sure the batteries get an optimum charging cycle. And what I'm going to do is go back out here. We're at 98%. Let's go ahead and turn on the MultiPlus. This is our shore power charger. We'll take the batteries up to 100% and we'll watch the parameters change. So if we click on the battery, we can click on Epoch. You can see our MultiPlus has come online and we can see some of its data there. But I'm going to click back and look at the battery parameters. And this is what they are when the batteries are at 98%, and then we'll come back and look at them when the batteries hit 100%. So while we're at it, I wanted to show, I've turned on a couple of other chargers, and you can see here where it says external control. That is denoting that the inverter charger is being controlled by the Epoch batteries. And if we look at the solar charger, we can just click on it, and you can see it says external control there. And then on the Orion XS, our alternator charger, we can click on that, and you can see it also says external control. So that is indicating to us that the Epoch batteries are controlling all three of those chargers, and that is what you're going to see once you hook up the Victron comms. All right, we're at 99%. You can see I've just got the shore power charger going, and we are at 14.0 volts. So we're getting there, and we should be going into the absorption phase in just a second. If we click on this, it may tell us that it's in the bulk mode. Okay, that's going to say external control, but if we click here, state says bulk charging. So in just a minute, when it hits 14.2 volts, it's going to switch to absorption mode, and it's going to hold that for 30 minutes, 15 minutes per battery. All right, so we hit 100% and 14.2 volts. It looks like it's just about to hit 14.2. And we can check and see the state should change to absorption. So you can see it's now changed from bulk charging to absorption charging. We can hear the MultiPlus slow down. You can see the amperage start to slow down as the batteries fill up. And if we look at our battery parameters, it'll still say 14.2 volts on our charge limit. But in 30 minutes, that's going to drop down to 13.5 volts for our float charge. And it will stay at 13.5 for as long as your charger is plugged in. Could be days or a week or 2 weeks. It's going to stay at that float voltage, and that's going to power any DC loads that turn on and AC loads as well. All right, it's been about 30 minutes and our absorption cycle should have ended. You can see there's not a whole lot of power going into the battery bank, and it's starting to fall to 14.1 volts. So our charge parameters have likely changed. If we click here and go into the Epoch and go down to parameters, you can see our charge voltage limit has now dropped to 13.5 volts. It was 14.2 during absorption, and it's basically going to stay at 13.5 as long as the charger stays on. and eventually the batteries are going to fall to that 13.5. They are going to supply power to any loads that come online, but once they hit 13.5, they're going to sit there, and the charger is going to take over supplying that 13.5 volts to any appliances, DC or AC appliances, and the batteries are just going to sit there idle, and you can leave them like that for days or weeks at a time, and it's really good because it's not going to cycle the batteries, and they're going to be ready when you shut off your charger or unplug from the power grid. The batteries are going to be fully charged and ready to go, but they're not going to be cycling during those days and weeks when you're plugged in. All right, so here we are in the VRM portal. I actually have two different windows open, and I wanted to show you the battery parameters change as we go below 90%. So you can see the battery bank is currently 90%, and I'm going to attempt to demonstrate this. Let's look at the battery parameters over here. You can see that our charged voltage is 13.5 volts still. So after we charged up to 100%, the charge voltage limit dropped to 13.5 volts. And now when we run the batteries down below 90%, you're going to see that charge parameter change back. So let's go ahead and turn on the inverter. And I've disconnected the power grid, so it's going to run some loads. We've got some electric stoves, and it's going to run the batteries down to 89%. And what I want you to watch is this number here. When this hits 89%, our charge voltage limit is going to go back up to 14.2 because the batteries are run down enough where it's going to allow us to recharge them with a new absorption cycle. So we will give it just a second here. It's going to hit 89% on the battery, and then the charge voltage limit should go back up. All right, so you can see we've hit 89%, and then bam, right on the right side, it jumped back up to 14.2 volts. So that is the Victron comms controlling the charge voltage limit dynamically based on the stated charge of the battery, and that way it doesn't go through repeated absorption cycles. It's only going to do another absorption cycle when it needs to. So hopefully that gave you some insight into what you can do with the Victron comms feature from the Epoch Elite version 2.0 batteries. As you can tell, this feature is going to have an impact on just about every facet of your power system, from charging to discharging to monitoring. And if you'd like to learn more about these batteries, my very last video, I actually looked at the batteries themselves as far as charge capability, discharge capability, capacity testing, and we did a good overall review of the battery itself. So check that out. I'll put the link down below. Special thanks also to Al Smith from the MV Intrigue channel. He gave me a lot of insights and helped me create this video. I'll link to his Victron comms video down below if you'd like to get even more data on this particular feature and everything you can do with it. And then lastly, if you want to pick up some of these batteries, I have a couple of links down below to the 12, 24, and 48 volt variation of this. So whatever battery voltage you're working with, they're going to have a variant that's going to work with that. And there's also a discount code to save 10% as well. So thanks for watching. Before you go, be sure to pick up a copy of the Ultimate VanPower cheat sheet. Just click the link below or go to rosslukman.com/vanpower. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.